The wedding of James and Diep looked like a fairy tale carved out of light. The chandeliers glowed like 1,000 tiny suns, soft music embraced the hall, and guests whispered about the beauty of the couple. Cameras flashed endlessly, capturing the image of a bride with sparkling eyes and a smile so sweet it could melt stone. To everyone, Diep was the luckiest woman alive, marrying the man who had crossed storms for her, the man who once defied the world just to hold her hand. But behind that perfect smile, something inside her trembled. Diep stood beside James as he proudly introduced her to business partners and relatives. His voice carried warmth, pride, love, everything a bride hoped to hear on her wedding day. Yet every time Diep met the gaze of someone from his family, especially his mother, her heart shrank a little more. The smiles from his relatives were stiff, cold, lined with judgment she could feel even from a distance. Their eyes scanned her dress, her posture, her words, as if searching for reasons to disapprove. James didn't notice. He was too happy, too swept away by the joy of seeing his dream finally come true. When he held Diep's hand in front of everyone, her fingers were slightly cold. She tried to hide it, tried to grip his hand tightly, but his attention quickly shifted to greeting another guest. She stood there, surrounded by hundreds of people, yet feeling as if she were behind a glass wall. Everyone clapped, cheered, drank, and celebrated the beginning of a beautiful marriage. No one noticed that the bride barely touched her food, barely spoke, barely looked anywhere except the floor. At one point, Diep stepped aside to breathe. The corridor was quiet, dim, and for a moment she let her smile fade. Her chest tightened with a feeling she couldn't name, something between fear and loneliness. She knew this wedding was a dream for James, a dream she deeply wanted to share. But the weight of silent hostility pressed on her shoulders like an invisible hand. Still, she wiped her tears before they could fall, fixed her dress, and returned to the hall. Because James was smiling, because he deserved joy, because no one must know the truth. Not tonight. Not on the day she promised to stay by his side forever.
The morning after the wedding should have been soft and peaceful, filled with laughter, warm breakfast, and tender moments. Instead, Diep woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. James was still asleep beside her, exhausted from the long night of celebration, his arm loosely draped over her waist. For a moment, Diep wished she could remain in that bubble of warmth forever, just the two of them, safe. But real life waited outside the bedroom door. When Diep stepped into the hallway, she immediately sensed tension twisting in the air. James's mother, elegantly dressed as always, stood near the kitchen speaking in a low but sharp voice with his aunt. The conversation stopped the moment Diep appeared. The two women exchanged a glance that carried enough disdain to bruise the heart. "Good morning," Diep greeted softly, forcing a polite smile. His mother looked at her with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You're awake. I thought my son married a girl who knows how to rise early." The words struck like a thin blade, quiet, precise, and meant to hurt. Diep lowered her head slightly. "I was preparing breakfast for James." "Oh!" The aunt raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know what he likes?" A simple question, yet the tone cut deeper than an insult. Diep remembered all the nights James cooked for her, all the times he laughed and called her clumsy in the kitchen. She wanted to say, "Yes, I know him better than anyone," but her voice remained trapped inside her throat. She moved quietly to the kitchen, hoping to avoid further attacks, but whispers followed her like shadows. "A village girl like that? Really? She won't last long. James will eventually realize what she truly is. Poor boy, he could have chosen someone better." Diep gripped the counter to steady herself. Her chest tightened again, the same painful squeeze she'd felt at the wedding. She tried to ignore the whispers, tried to remind herself of James's gentleness, his love, the way he had held her hands beneath the stars and promised a future together. That memory was the thread holding her together. When James finally entered the kitchen, smiling sleepily and wrapping his arms around her from behind, her entire body relaxed for a brief moment. "Good morning, my wife," he whispered. Diep smiled, but it was fragile, because even as he kissed her cheek, she could feel the eyes of his family watching, judging, waiting for her to break. And deep down, she wondered how long she could keep pretending she wasn't already breaking.
James noticed the tension long before Diep found the courage to admit it. He saw the stiffness in her shoulders when his mother entered the room, the forced smile she wore at every family meal, the way her hands trembled slightly whenever someone questioned her, even with something as harmless as setting the dinner table. But every time he tried to ask, Diep brushed it off. "I'm fine," she would insist. And James wanted to believe her. He truly did. But on the third night after the wedding, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Diep's muffled sobs. She had gone to the balcony, thinking the night would hide her tears, but James found her curled against the railing, her face buried in her knees. For a moment he froze, shocked and angry at himself for not seeing it sooner. Then he knelt beside her, touching her shoulder gently. "Diep, what happened?" She shook her head immediately. "Nothing. I'm just tired." "Don't lie to me." His voice broke with fear. "Please." Her lips trembled. The dam inside her chest cracked. "They don't want me here, James," she whispered, choking on her words. "Your mother, your aunt, everyone in this house looks at me like I don't belong. They talk behind my back. They think I'm not worthy of you. And I'm trying, James. I'm trying so hard." James felt his heart collapse. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he could shield her from every bit of pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered fiercely. "Because I didn't want to cause trouble between you and your family. I know you're caught in the middle. I didn't want you to choose." James closed his eyes. The truth was harsher than he expected. His family's expectations had always been heavy, but he never imagined they would attack the woman he loved. The anger simmered inside him, cold, sharp, and dangerous. "You never have to face this alone," he said firmly, cupping her tear-stained cheeks. "You are my wife, my partner. If anyone hurts you, they hurt me too." Diep looked at him, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "Do you really mean that?" "I mean every word." He kissed her forehead, lingering there, as if trying to press a promise into her skin. But even as he held her close, he knew this was not something that would disappear overnight. His family was powerful, stubborn, and bound by pride. They would not accept Diep easily. And he was beginning to understand that loving her might mean standing against the people who raised him. A quiet war was already beginning, one that could either strengthen their marriage or tear their world apart.
The morning after Diep finally broke down, James woke with a resolve colder and sharper than steel. He had held her until she fell asleep, her tears still warm against his shirt. Her pain had carved something new inside him, something fierce, protective, and unshakable. When he stepped into the dining hall, the atmosphere was as polished and cold as the marble floors.
His mother, Margaret, sat at the head of the table, her posture elegant, her expression unreadable. His aunt and cousin whispered quietly, pausing only when James entered. For years, James had ignored the small slights, the cutting remarks, the hidden expectations. But today, every dismissive glance toward Diep felt like a knife being twisted. "Where is your wife?" Margaret asked casually, though her eyes gleamed with judgment. "She's resting," James answered flatly. "Last night was difficult for her." Her aunt scoffed. "If she can't handle simple social expectations, how will she manage our household responsibilities?" James' jaw tightened. "She is my wife, not your servant." The table fell silent. Margaret lifted her teacup slowly, the movement graceful but loaded with displeasure. "James, you are letting emotions cloud your judgment. A woman like her mother." His voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't finish that sentence." Margaret froze, startled. James had never spoken to her with such cold finality. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury held too tightly inside him. "You don't have to like Diep, but you will respect her." Her cousin leaned forward. "James, we're just worried. She's from a different world. She doesn't know how to behave in high society. She is kind. She is gentle. She is everything you're not willing to see because your pride blinds you." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and left the table, his heart beating hard, every step echoing with defiance. Upstairs, Diep sat on the edge of the bed, braiding Nee's hair while forcing a smile. The little girl chatted happily, unaware of the storm brewing downstairs. When James entered, Diep looked up instantly, searching his expression, afraid of what he might say. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "I talked to them," he murmured into her hair. Diep stiffened. "James, you didn't have to fight with your family because of me." He cupped her face gently. "I didn't fight because of you. I fought for you." Her eyes shimmered. The walls she had built around her heart, walls made from humiliation, rejection, and fear, crumbled slowly as she looked at him. "You are my wife, and if protecting you means standing against the whole world, I will." Outside their room, the house remained cold, hostile, and full of whispers. Nothing had changed on the surface. But inside James and Diep's hearts, something had. A new strength, a new unity, a marriage no longer just celebrated with flowers and rings, but forged in the quiet, invisible battles that no one else could see. Their love would be tested by shadows, but this time, Diep wasn't suffering alone. James was finally standing beside her, truly, fiercely, and unapologetically. And the war for their happiness had only just begun.
The story of Diep and James reminds us that what shines on the outside may hide deep wounds within. A beautiful wedding, a luxurious mansion, or the approval of society means nothing if the heart of a person is bruised and unheard. Diep's silent suffering teaches us that love without protection becomes a burden, and promises without action become a cage. James's journey shows that love requires courage, courage to stand against family, tradition, and the expectations of the world. Loving someone is not only about offering joy, but also about shielding them when storms rise. True commitment demands sacrifice, understanding, and the strength to choose the person you love
even when everything else tries to pull you away. The story also teaches us that silence is dangerous. When pain is hidden for too long, it grows roots in the heart. Speaking up, seeking help, and trusting the people who truly care can change everything. Diep's courage to face the truth and James's decision to fight for her remind us that honesty is the foundation of real healing. Finally, this story reminds us that love is not proven by grand celebrations, but by quiet acts of protection, loyalty, and empathy. A wedding can be staged, but genuine love cannot be faked. True happiness comes only when two hearts stand together, not just in moments of joy, but through fear, betrayal, and hardship. The lesson is simple, yet powerful. Protect the ones you love. Listen before pain becomes silence. And remember that the strongest relationships are built not on appearances, but on truth, courage, and unwavering devotion.